Hey there, friends. Tonight, we'll journey together through a calm and gentle story, one that will help you relax, unwind, and drift into a deep, peaceful sleep. Now dim the lights, close your eyes, and take a slow, deep breath in. Exhale gently, and with every breath, allow your body to sink deeper into comfort. Crescent moon, let's begin the story. The night was heavy with silence, a strange, patient silence that waited as if even the wind was afraid to move. Far above the sleeping kingdom, the old fort of Ayadgar stood against the moon, its walls scarred, its towers tired, yet proud. The stars hung low, watching, remembering, and inside those crumbling stone halls, a single lamp burned. Its flame was small, trembling, but it refused to die. There, beneath its faint light, sat Queen Vaidehi. Her hands were steady, her eyes calm, too calm for a night before war. Before her lay a half-folded letter, and beside it, the sword that once belonged to her husband, King Aravardan. She touched the hilt gently, as if afraid to wake the spirit sleeping within it. The steel was cold. Her heart was not. Outside, the temple bells were ringing, slow, rhythmic, echoing through the courtyards like a heartbeat that refused to stop. She looked toward the sound and whispered, almost to herself, "So, it begins again, the night that takes everything." For years she had known this sound, the warning of drums, the whisper of armor, the sharp scent of fear in the air. But tonight was different. Tonight she would not hide behind marble walls. Tonight, history would remember her face, or bury it one last time. Once long ago, she had been a girl who believed in music. Her world was filled with sitar notes, the rustle of silk, the laughter of maidens running through the garden. She had never learned the language of war. Her fingers were made for ink, not iron. Her heart for love, not for fire. When she married Aravardan, she thought her life would remain that gentle rhythm F. Forever. He was kind, more poet than soldier, and she often teased him for dreaming of peace in a world built on conquest. But fate, like an impatient sculptor, never liked perfection. The north rose in rebellion. The rivers turned red, and one morning, Aravardan rode out with 10,000 men and never returned. They brought back his armor, not his body. They brought back his banner, torn and burnt, not his voice. And since that day, Ayadgar had been silent. Even the birds had stopped singing near the palace. Vaidehi wore white for years, not out of grief, but out of respect for the dead who watched her every day. She walked through empty gardens, spoke to no one, and sometimes, when the moon was low, she swore she could still hear his laughter echoing through the corridors. But tonight, even that laughter was gone. She sat with her letter, and she began to write. Her voice was a whisper against the stillness. "My beloved Aravardan, I was never made for swords. You knew that. You laughed the first time I tried to hold yours, said I gripped it like a pen. But tonight, I must hold it like I once held you. The ministers want me to run. They say a queen's duty is to survive, to preserve the throne. But what is a throne without the soil that holds it? If I flee, the people will lose faith. If I fight, they will believe again. And so I will fight." Her ink paused there, a drop falling where her hand trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of everything she could not write. She rose from her seat. Her maids rushed to her, their faces pale, their hands shaking. "Your Majesty," one said, "the gates won't hold till morning." Vaidehi smiled softly. "Then we'll meet the morning halfway." She walked to the old armory, its doors sealed with dust. Inside, cobwebs draped the spears like forgotten shrouds. She found a chest marked with her husband's crest, a sun carved into oak. When she opened it, the smell of iron filled the air. Sharp and clean, like memory, she lifted his armor, It was heavier than she remembered. Her frame was smaller, the metal hung loose. But she wore it anyway, piece by piece, until the queen disappeared and something else stood in her place. In the mirror's flickering light, she looked like a ghost reborn, half fire, half silence. She took one last look at the empty room, the bed they once shared, the lamp still burning low. Then she blew out the flame. The fort was awake now. Torches flickered along the walls, and the sound of marching boots filled the air. From every corner of Ayadgar came the scent of oil, sweat, and prayer. The people, her people, had gathered at the gates. Farmers, blacksmiths, old men who had never held a sword, all waiting for her word. When she appeared, they fell silent. Some wept, others bowed. A few murmured her name, Vaidehi, Vaidehi. She raised her hand and spoke quietly, her voice steady as a temple bell. I do not ask you to die for me. I ask you to live for the land that made you. The gods do not live in the sky. They live in the soil beneath your feet. The crowd stirred. The silence broke. 1,000 hearts began to beat as one. The horizon glowed red, not from dawn, but from fire. The enemy had arrived. And Queen Vaidehi, wearing her husband's armor, mounted her black horse and rode into the dark. She did not look back. The gates of Ayadgar opened with a sound that shook the air. The wood groaned, iron chains screamed, and the night, the quiet, watching night, split into chaos. Arrows hissed like snakes. Drums thundered from the valley below. The enemy's banners, black and gold, rippled against the wind, marching closer, step by step, like an approaching storm. And at the front of her army, Vaidehi rode alone. The armor weighed on her shoulders. But the voice inside her heart, the voice that once belonged to Erevarden, made her forget the weight. Courage, he had once said, is not the absence of fear. It is fear tamed by love. The words echoed in her chest as she lifted her sword. The metal caught the first arrow of dawn and flung it back as light. For a moment, the enemy faltered. A queen in shining armor stood where a widow was expected. A legend began quietly, without the permission of history. The first clash came like thunder. Stale mit stale, and the night turned red. Vaidehi moved like a whisper through the storm, her sword a streak of light, her voice a calm within chaos. The men around her fought harder when they saw her, as if her courage was fire and they were sparks. But every fire burns at a cost. Hours passed. The moon faded. Smoke wrapped around the fort like mourning cloth. Vaidehi's arms were trembling now. Her armor bore dents. Her hair was streaked with blood and ash. She had led 3 charges, broken 2 enemy lines. But the third swallowed her. A spear tore through her shoulder, and she fell from her horse into the mud. The world blurred. Screams, drums, the smell of iron and rain. She tried to rise, but the ground clung to her like a hand, refusing to let go. She could see her people retreating toward the gates. The enemy was closing in. She thought of running for just a second, then laughed softly, a broken laugh. A queen does not flee, she whispered, tasting blood. Not when her people are watching. She crawled toward a fallen banner, her husband's sun emblem, half buried in the mud. She pressed her hand to it and pulled herself up again. Every step hurt, every breath burned, but she moved, slow and certain, like destiny walking through fire. The enemy soldiers hesitated when they saw her again, not because she was stronger, but because she refused to fall, and sometimes refusal is its own kind of power. Then, as the horizon began to pale, the horn of retreat sounded. Ayadgar had survived the night. The enemy, tired, bleeding, half-blind in the smoke, fell back into the valley. The war was not won, but it was no longer lost. When the gates closed again, the people found her near the ramparts. She was sitting beneath the broken flag, her sword across her knees, her eyes distant, as if she were already somewhere else. "Your Majesty," a soldier said, kneeling beside her, "the fortress stands because of you." Vaidehi smiled faintly. Her voice was barely a whisper. "No," she said, "the fortress stands because you believed." By morning, she could no longer stand. The wound had deepened. The blood would not stop. They carried her to the old Jasmine courtyard, the place where she used to write letters under the moonlight. She asked for her ink and her paper, and there, with trembling hands, she began her final letter. "My beloved Erevarden, the sun has risen on a broken land, but our people still sing. I have seen them fight with bare hands, seen children bring water to dying soldiers, seen old men light torches when all lamps had gone dark. You once said a queen is the heart of her kingdom. Tonight I learned what that means. The heart does not command. It beats quietly so that others may live." Her ink faded near the end. Her hand fell still, but she smiled, a small, peaceful smile, as if the letter had already reached him. That night, the jasmine trees bloomed early, the air filled with their fragrance, soft and white like falling snow. The people buried her there under those blossoms and placed the letter in her hands. No royal rites, no grand funeral, just silence, and a promise whispered by every wind that passed through Aydgar. Time, like a river, never stops. It carries everything, kingdoms, names, prayers, and drowns them softly in its endless tide. Centuries passed over Aydgar. The fort that once glowed with banners and laughter became a skeleton of stone and moss. The wind moved through its empty halls like a memory trying to speak. The people forgot the queen's face. They remembered only her legend, a whisper told by mothers to their daughters, a tale traded between travelers near the fire. There was once a queen, they said, who fought like the sun and slept beneath the jasmine trees. No one knew her name anymore. Not Vaidehi, not Erevarden, only the queen of the last letter. One quiet evening, hundreds of years later, a traveler came to Aydgar. He was young, a scholar from the southern plains, his eyes bright with the kind of hunger that only dreamers carry. He walked with a small satchel, a notebook, and a promise to find truth where history had forgotten to look. When he reached the ruined gates, the sunset was spilling gold through the cracks. Birds circled above the towers. The air smelled faintly of rain and old stone. He stepped inside. Dust rose under his feet. Vines clung to the walls like green veins. Every corner of the fort seemed to breathe, as if the place was alive, waiting. He wandered for hours, through broken courtyards, through crumbling chambers. And then, by accident, he found a jasmine tree. It stood alone in the center of a forgotten garden, its trunk twisted, ancient, its roots clutching the earth like memories refusing to die. Beneath it, half hidden in the soil, was a flat stone. He brushed away the dirt. The letters were faint, nearly gone, but one line was still clear. "Here rests the heart of Aydgar." He paused. Something inside him stirred, the kind of feeling that is both sorrow and awe. He knelt beside the grave and noticed something else. A corner of brittle parchment, buried deep, trapped between the roots. He reached for it carefully. The paper was yellowed, fragile. Its ink faded like a whisper at the edge of time. But it was there, a letter, her letter. He could not read all of it. Parts were gone, eaten by the earth. But the words that survived felt alive. "If I flee, the people will lose faith. If I fight, they will believe again." His breath caught. He read on, slowly, reverently, as though every word might vanish if spoken too loud. When he finished, he sat there for a long time. The sun had gone down. The fort was a shadow against the sky, and the jasmine blossoms, somehow still blooming, fell around him like white rain. That night, he lit a small lamp near her grave. The flame flickered, just as hers had centuries ago. He opened his notebook and began to write. Tonight, I found a letter beneath the roots of time. The words belonged to a queen who was never remembered by name. But in her silence, I have found my voice. History records kings. Legends remember gods. But the earth remembers women. Women who fought, who loved, who carried the world on their shoulders and asked for nothing. The scholar stayed there for 3 days. He wrote by day and listened by night. Sometimes, in the soft hum of the wind, he thought he could hear a whisper, a woman's voice, faint but kind, speaking not to him, but through him. Tell them, she said. Tell them I was not a myth. Tell them I was real. When he finally left Ayadgar, he carried her letter pressed between the pages of his book. He did not take a picture, did not make a map. He said the fort should remain hidden, a sacred secret for those who believe in forgotten things. Years later, his writings would be published, a small, thin volume called The Queen of the Last Letter. It would travel across cities and oceans, finding its way into hands that needed to remember courage. And in every copy, on the first page, he printed her final words. The gods do not live in the sky. They live in the soil beneath your feet. Even today, they say, if you stand beneath the jasmine tree on a quiet night, you can still smell the faint trace of ink in the air. And sometimes, when the wind passes through the fort's broken towers, you can hear the sound of armor and a woman's laughter echoing softly through the centuries. The rain had just stopped. The city outside her window was still shimmering. 1,000 drops of light on glass. 1,000 voices fading into night. Ananya sat by her desk, her tea gone cold, her eyes tracing the last page of a thin, old book. The Queen of the Last Letter. That was its name. She had found it by accident in a second-hand store, tucked between cracked textbooks and forgotten diaries. The cover was worn. The pages smelled of dust and memory. But something about it had called to her. The quiet promise of a story waiting to be remembered. Now, as she read the final line, they live in the soil beneath your feet. She felt something strange, a soft pull, like a thread tying her to someone unseen. She closed the book and turned off the light. But sleep did not come easily. Outside, thunder murmured far away. Inside, the words of the letter kept echoing in her head. If I flee, the people will lose faith. If I fight, they will believe again. She whispered them out loud, just to hear how they sounded in her own voice. And when she did, the air shifted. The shadows in the room deepened. The lamp flickered, and somewhere between waking and dreaming, she heard it, a faint sound, like the rustle of silk and armor in the dark. When she opened her eyes, she was no longer in her room. The air was warm, heavy with jasmine. A moon hung low above broken towers, and before her stood a woman, tall, radiant, her armor gleaming faintly beneath the starlight. Her face was calm, her eyes impossibly gentle. "Who are you?" Ananya whispered. The woman smiled. "You already know." They stood there in silence. The fort stretched around them, quiet and endless. The air was alive with memory. Ananya wanted to speak, to ask 100 questions, but her voice caught her throat. The woman walked closer, her footsteps soundless on the stone. She reached out, and with a touch softer than breath, placed something in Ananya's hand. It was a letter, old, folded, its edges glowing faintly like embers. It was never meant for one man. The woman said, it was meant for every woman who would one day be told to stay silent. Ananya looked down at the letter. The ink shimmered faintly, as if it had been written only moments ago. The woman continued, her voice calm, melodic, like someone remembering rather than speaking. "I was queen once. They call me brave, but courage was only another name for love. I fought because I could not bear to see my people fall. I wrote because I could not let my silence be my grave. She paused, her gaze softening. You live in a world that has forgotten us. The mothers, the dreamers, the women whose names were erased so that men could be remembered. The wind stirred the jasmine blossoms. They drifted around them like snow, settling in her hair, on her armor, on Ananya's hands. But every word written in truth, she said, is a sword that never rusts. Ananya felt tears rise, slow, unbidden. I'm not a warrior, she said softly. I'm just a historian. I read. I write. That's all. Vaidehi, for that was who she was, smiled. And that, she said, is enough. History does not change through battle alone. It changes when someone dares to remember. The fort began to fade around them. The stars blurred, the air shimmered, and the sound of bells echoed faintly. The same bells that had once rung before a final war. Vaidehi stepped back, her voice now distant but clear. Tell our stories, Ananya. Tell them that we were not shadows. Tell them that the soil beneath their feet was shaped by women's hands. Ananya tried to hold on, but the wind grew stronger, and the queen's image dissolved into light. She woke up gasping. Her room was quiet again. The rain had stopped, but on her desk, the book lay open, and beside it, a single jasmine flower. Fresh, real. She picked it up slowly, her fingers trembling. The scent filled the room. Soft, haunting, ancient. She looked at the open page, and though she could swear she hadn't written anything, there was a new line at the bottom, written in faint golden ink. History remembers what hearts refuse to forget. That night, Ananya began to write, not as a scholar, not as a woman chasing footnotes and facts, but as someone guided by a voice that refused to die. She wrote of queens and poets, of sculptors and sailors, of women who carried kingdoms in silence. She wrote until the first light touched her window, and somewhere, in the quiet corners of time, Vaidehi smiled. Morning came softly. The city stirred, buses rumbled, crows called, the world remembered itself again. But inside Ananya's small apartment, time had stopped. She sat at her desk, her hair uncombed, her eyes alive with something new. The jasmine flower still lay beside the open book. Its petals had not faded. They looked impossibly fresh, as if the night had been only a breath ago. She opened her notebook and began to write. Not a paper, not an essay, something else. Something that felt older, like a promise waiting to be fulfilled. At the top of the page, she wrote, "The Book of Forgotten Queens." Below it, a single sentence. To the women whose stories were buried, but whose echoes never died. She didn't know what she was writing exactly. A novel? A history? It didn't matter. She only knew she had to begin. Days turned into weeks. Ananya's flat filled with notes, maps, scrolls, and sleepless nights. She searched libraries, temples, forgotten archives. Everywhere the dust of time might have hidden a name. Some nights she dreamt of Vaidehi. Not always clearly, sometimes only a voice, sometimes the glint of armor under moonlight. But the feeling remained constant, a quiet strength, urging her to keep going. Her first story was about Rani Chitradevi, a poet from the eastern kingdom of Kalanagar. Historians called her consort, nothing more. But Ananya found fragments of her poems carved inside a ruined temple wall. Lines of longing, power, and grief. Lines that spoke of a woman who once ruled through her words. Where her husband's voice had failed, she translated them slowly, each verse like a heartbeat from the past. I wrote not to be remembered, but so the wind could carry my name where my tongue could not. When Ananya read it aloud, she felt a shiver. It was the same tone, as Vaidehi's letter, the same soft defiance wrapped in grace. Then came the story of Meenakshi, a sculptor from the southern coast, whose temple carvings were praised across kingdoms, but never signed with her name. Ananya found a record in an old merchant's diary. A single line, "The goddess in the inner sanctum bears the sculptor's face." She traveled there, and when she stood before the idol, she saw it, a faint scar above the eyebrow, the same as the woman in an old charcoal sketch she'd uncovered in a museum basement. It was her, Meenakshi, immortal in stone, but forgotten by words. Each discovery felt like unearthing a heartbeat. Each story, a resurrection. Ananya began to feel that she was not writing these women's tales. She was listening to them. Sometimes, when she sat alone in the dark, the air around her seemed to hum softly, as if the room itself was full of unseen voices. Her editor called one afternoon, puzzled. "Ananya," he said, "you haven't submitted your research paper in months. Are you all right?" She hesitated. How could she explain that history had started speaking back? "I'm fine," she said. "I'm working on something different. Something that isn't just history." There was a pause. Then the voice on the line softened. "Then let it be truth, Ananya, even if no one believes it." By the time monsoon came again, her apartment was overflowing with pages. Names of women long erased now covered her walls. Queens, warriors, poets, mothers, wanderers. Some known by legend, some known only by a single word carved into stone. Ananya often worked through the night. The world outside blurred into rain and silence. Her pen became her weapon, her breath, her prayer. And every time she felt tired, she'd catch a faint scent of jasmine in the air, and she would remember why she began. The first draft of the Book of Forgotten Queens was finished on a quiet dawn. The city was still asleep. Her hands trembled as she turned the last page. It wasn't perfect, it didn't need to be. It was alive. She closed her notebook and whispered, "Vaidehi, it's done." Outside, the wind stirred. A few petals drifted through the open window, soft, white, fragrant. They fell on her desk, over the title page, and one landed exactly where she had written her name. That evening, she carried the finished manuscript to the old fort of Ayadgar. She had never been there before, but somehow, every road seemed to lead her there, as if the story itself was guiding her home. The ruins were quiet, just as the book had described, the air thick with history and jasmine. She walked to the center courtyard, to the ancient tree that still stood strong among the stones. She placed her manuscript beneath its roots and whispered, "You gave me your story. I give you mine." The wind rose gently, and for a moment, the rustle of leaves sounded like a woman's laughter, warm, proud, eternal. That night, back in the city, when she looked up at the sky, she saw the faintest flicker of gold between the clouds, like the glint of armor catching moonlight. And in that shimmer, she heard a voice once more, clear as the first time, whispering across centuries. Books travel differently than people. They do not march. They drift like seeds on wind, carried by hands, eyes, whispers. Months after Ananya left her manuscript beneath the jasmine tree, the Book of Forgotten Queens found its way into the world. No one knew exactly how. One morning, a local bookseller in Delhi found a copy on his doorstep. No publisher's mark, no price, just a cover made of soft handmade paper. And inside, the words, written by those who refused to be forgotten. He placed it quietly on a corner shelf. By evening, it was gone, bought by someone who never gave their name. And thus began the journey. The book passed through hands like a secret prayer. A teacher in Lucknow read it to her students. One story each Friday before the bell. Her favorite was Vaidehi's letter. She said it made her dream of courage that doesn't need an army. In a train somewhere near Kolkata, A widow found a copy left behind on a seat. She opened it at random and read the line. "The heart does not command, it beats quietly, so that others may live." She pressed the page to her chest, closed her eyes, and, for the first time in years, felt peace instead of emptiness. Far away across the sea, a student in New York found the same book in a library donation box. The title intrigued her, The Book of Forgotten Queens. She read it that night, curled under a lamp. Her mother was from India, her grandmother too, but their stories had been drowned beneath new accents and new cities. When she reached the final line, history remembers what hearts refuse to forget. She called her mother the next morning and said, "Tell me about our family. Tell me what I've never asked." And slowly, quietly, without fanfare or announcement, the world began to remember. Women started to write again, not for fame, but for themselves. Some wrote letters to their grandmothers. Some painted. Some simply whispered their own names aloud before sleep, as if reclaiming them. It was not a movement. It was a murmuring, a gentle wave that began in hearts and spread through silence. Ananya watched it all from afar. She had not expected any of it. She had thought her book would fade like most stories do. But something larger was at work. Something older, patient, luminous. Her inbox filled with letters. Strangers wrote of how they felt seen. A young archaeologist said she had found evidence of a forgotten warrior queen near the desert cliffs. An old woman from Kerala sent a poem that her mother used to sing. A lullaby about a woman who sailed alone to bring rice to a starving village. Each story carried the same heartbeat. Defiance wrapped in grace. Vaidehi's grace. One night, Ananya visited the old fort again. It was darker now, the stones wet with moss. The jasmine tree older, heavier with time. She brought a lantern and sat beneath it, reading the letters people had sent her aloud. Each voice echoed softly in the courtyard. One from a girl in Tehran, one from a grandmother in Jaipur, one from a woman in Nairobi who said she felt Vaidehi's spirit in her dreams. The fort seemed to listen. The night air shimmered, and when she finished the last letter, the wind stirred the branches, and hundreds of jasmine blossoms fell, like blessings, somewhere in the rustle of leaves. A familiar whisper came, faint, kind, unhurried. "Do you see, Ananya? I was never one woman. I was all of them. I was every heart that refused to vanish." Ananya closed her eyes. Tears welled, but she smiled. "Yes," she whispered back. "I see you now." The lantern flame flickered. For a moment, the light bent into a shape, the silhouette of a woman in armor. Her head bowed, her hands open in peace. Then the wind rose again, and she was gone. But the jasmine tree glowed faintly, each flower shining like a small star, as if every forgotten queen had found her place among them. That night, as Ananya walked back to the village, she felt lighter, not empty, but shared, and though she could not see it, the light from her lantern left a trail behind her, a golden thread weaving through the darkness, connecting every woman who had ever dared to remember. The world had changed quietly. Ananya didn't know when it happened. Perhaps the first time someone said, "I remember." Perhaps the first time a forgotten queen's name was spoken aloud again. But now, stories were moving like rivers beneath the surface of life. Ancient, unseen, unstoppable. It was a letter that summoned her. An envelope, cream-colored, hand-delivered by a courier one misty morning. Inside, a single page written in careful, old-fashioned handwriting. "Dr. Ananya Rao, we are unearthing a temple near Baravgar. The inscriptions resemble passages from your book. We request your presence." At the bottom, the seal of the Archaeological Survey of India. She read it twice, then once more. Her breath caught somewhere between disbelief and destiny. Beravgar, the very place where she had first felt Vaidehi's voice, the fort whose stones had whispered to her. She traveled the next morning. The train wound through green hills and sunbathed fields, through villages still waking to the sound of temple bells. She kept the letter on her lap, her fingers tracing the words again and again. Outside, the landscape blurred into memory. Sometimes she thought she saw figures in the mist, women in veils, carrying torches, faces proud and patient. Watching her pass, the excavation site lay deep in the forest, surrounded by banyan trees whose roots hung like curtains of time. Archaeologists moved carefully among stone fragments, dusting, photographing, documenting. At the center stood a partially unearthed temple. Its walls glimmered faintly under the sun, etched with thousands of names. Names of women, each name carved in a delicate script, each letter still sharp, though centuries old. Ananya knelt and touched one, the stone cool beneath her fingertips. It read, Vaidehi. Her eyes stung with tears, not from surprise, but from recognition. She had known this moment long before she arrived. The chief archaeologist approached, a gentle woman in her 60s, wearing a wide hat and a tired smile. You must be Dr. Rao, she said softly. We found these inscriptions 2 weeks ago. Thousands of them, all women's names, all dated to a period before recorded dynasties. She pointed to a section near the base of the temple wall. The style matches no known kingdom, but one name appears again and again. Vaidehi, the protector of the south gate. Ananya's heart thudded. Protector, not queen, not wife. Protector. History had hidden the truth in plain sight. As the sun began to set, Ananya walked deeper into the temple ruins. Every wall whispered. Every stone felt alive. In the inner sanctum, half buried under soil and roots, she found a small stone chest. Inside, wrapped in fragments of silk, lay a thin copper plate covered in ancient script. She held it gently. The words were faint but visible. When she read them, her breath stopped. To those who carry our stories, you are us reborn. Below it, a mark, a tiny carving of a jasmine flower. The forest fell silent. Even the wind seemed to pause. And then, as if from somewhere beyond time, the voice came again. You found me, Ananya, but I was never lost. She turned. No one was there. Only the golden light of dusk spilling through the trees. The voice continued, gentle as rain. We were the protectors, the builders, the singers. We were never the shadows of men. We were the dawn they forgot to name. Ananya fell to her knees, trembling, tears streaming freely down her face. The earth around her glowed faintly, not with fire, but with memory. Every name on the wall shimmered. Every letter breathed. It was as if the temple itself had awakened, whispering the chorus of forgotten lives. That night, Ananya refused to leave. She stayed under the stars beside the temple, her notebook open, her hands too full of awe to write. The forest hummed softly, the sound of roots remembering, and somewhere within the hum, she heard many voices now, hundreds, maybe thousands, all whispering in harmony. We're not gone. We are the foundation beneath your world. You walk on our stories every day. Ananya closed her eyes and let the sound fill her. It was not frightening. It was peace, the kind that comes when silence turns sacred. By morning, she knew what she had to do. Her next book would not just tell stories. It would name names, every single one found in the Temple of Names. It would be a memorial, a resurrection, a mirror. She smiled quietly, watching the sunlight fall on the carvings. Each name gleamed gold for a moment, then faded back into stone. Content remembered. As she turned to leave, a single jasmine petal floated down from nowhere and landed on the copper plate in her hands. She smiled. and whispered, "Thank you, Vaidehi." The wind stirred once more, and in that hush between heartbeats, the voice answered, "Thank you, Ananya, for giving us back our names."